Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. I appreciate y'all that are here with me tonight. We appreciate those tuning in on Facebook, and we'll have y'all come right on in. We've always got a few right about now that makes it in with us, and so that's all good. Um, a couple of things that I wanted to share with y'all tonight. I'm going to save Will's until I know we've got everybody in here. Will is wanting me to ask for some help tonight. I'm going to wait till we make sure everybody's in here, make sure everybody knows about it. But I would like for y'all to be in prayer for the family of Kristen Sims. Um, she was the assistant daycare manager at our former church, Clarks River. And yesterday morning, her kids got up to go to school, and she had not came out there yet. And so the kids went in there to check on her, and she had passed away overnight. She's 39. Her kids were 10, 12, maybe. Second grade. Okay, well, they're not even that old. And obviously, just tragic. If you know anything about preschools and daycares, it is all you can do to get help. So keep our former church in your prayers too, because we've battled for years trying to keep help, and she was really good and had been there for a while. But obviously, the greater loss is her family and the two young ones. I'm sorry, I can't remember her husband's name. Justin. Okay, Justin Sims. Thank you. But remember them. I mean, just a terrible tragedy, and kind of hard for me to even imagine it. But everybody, a bunch of people started messaging me about it yesterday, and everybody was really shook up about it. Remember, 6 o'clock Friday night, we're going to be having a Good Friday service here. Love to have you if you can make it. Might be a good opportunity for you to invite somebody. Few other churches do them too. But if you have somebody you've been wanting to come with you, might be a good opportunity there. Maybe to get them to come, and then you might be able to get them to come with you Easter too. So keep that in mind. Of course, Sunday morning, our Easter celebration, and then that's going to be followed up right after the service. Church is going to be doing the Lord's Supper. So that's one thing that I've always encouraged people. If you're a member of a church, you really need to take the Lord's Supper with your church. We only practice two ordinances in our Baptist churches, and that's baptism and the Lord's Supper. And I think sometimes the Lord's Supper is not a very big deal to people, but obviously it was a very big deal for the Lord when He instituted it, and it is one of my favorite things. We don't do it a lot, and so it's always special. I'm looking forward to it. My wife and I have not been able to take the Lord's Supper in a long time because we're here and there and everywhere else. And so I'm looking forward to it myself, being able to take part in it. So keep those in mind, and be in prayer for me as we're doing these services. Be in prayer. I tell you, last Sunday night, those kids did an unbelievable job. I am very thankful that I didn't have to preach after that, because, the old saying was in show business, just don't ever follow kids or dogs. Well, I would not want to have to preach after that. Tiff and I were blown away with them. Their personal testimonies were awesome. Their production, Will, and all of them, they done an amazing job, and it was a true blessing. If you're watching us tonight on Facebook, that's on our Facebook page. I encourage you to click over there and watch it. It was beautiful. It was a fantastic night. So I'm going to ask you, if you would, to join me in prayer, and then we'll open up tonight. Father, we come before you tonight, Lord, and we are thankful for this beautiful season we're in right now, this most glorious and beautiful time of the year. And Lord, I always feel like when I see spring coming, it's like the earth is trying once again to renew itself. But we understand that the Bible's very clear that it is slowly fading away. But as it slowly fades away, it's not something for us to be sorrowful for as believers. It's something for us to be excited about. Because as it fades away, it means we are that much closer to your second coming. And Lord, we look forward to that. We praise you tonight for your first coming, as we've been looking at through this little Easter series we're doing. All the things you went through, and these next couple of messages, it doesn't get much tougher than some of this, Lord, realizing everything you went through. But as the old saying goes, and it's not just a cliche, we are thankful that Sunday's coming. We look forward to it, Lord. We lift up the Sims family to you tonight during this terrible time of loss for them. I just pray, Lord, you'd put special grace on that family right now, and for that poor father who's left with those two young kids. I can't imagine being in his place, and I don't think anybody would ever want to be. So just pray you would just bless them in a special way. We look forward to our time in your word tonight. Do all these things in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen. If you would, join me tonight in John chapter 18. John chapter 18. We have been walking through, I entitled it From the Upper Room to the Empty Tomb. We started, of course, in the upper room with Jesus as he washed the feet of his disciples. And as I've said more than once through this series, it was not about foot washing. It was Jesus showing them what it means to be great. And he taught them over and over and over again that if they were seeking greatness, you seek it by being humble. And as he says, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And he was showing them that he was willing to humiliate himself for salvation. And now we are in the situation, we are now Friday morning, shortly after daylight, when we left off last Sunday morning. Jesus has been to the house of Annas, who was the former high priest, and there they did an unofficial and illegal kangaroo court trial, as I call it. They already had their verdict made, but they could do nothing really about it, so they left there and they took him to the house of Caiaphas. Caiaphas was Annas' father-in-law, and Caiaphas was the current high priest. It was nighttime, and that trial was also illegal under Jewish law, but they left there exactly like they left the last one. They brought in false witnesses. They told lies about him. They lied to him. They lied about him. They accused him of things he did not do. And they decided he was guilty, but they couldn't do anything about it, because by Jewish law, a criminal trial could not be held at night, and a capital case, in other words, a death penalty case, had to be held at the temple, and it had to be open to the public. So shortly after daylight, they now have an official trial. They all come together, meeting all of their own rules. They decide he is a blasphemer. They decide he needs to be put to death. And so in John chapter 18, verse number 28, we pick up there right where we kind of left off, and it says, "Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover." If you remember, I read that and kind of ran out of time on it Sunday morning. As I said, it's one of the most hypocritical things you're ever going to see anybody do anywhere. Because under Jewish law, if a Jew went into the house of a Gentile, they would be unclean. And so the Jewish leaders take Jesus to the praetorium where Pilate sits on his judgment seat. And obviously, this would be the Romans. The Romans were Gentiles. The Jews deliver him there, but they cannot go in because they don't want to be defiled, because they're going to have their Passover that night. I never knew this until a few years ago, that depending on where you lived in and around Jerusalem, they did not all take the Passover meal the same night. So that night was when all of the Pharisees and the leaders, and they were worried about the fact, we're going to be defiled, we won't be able to eat the Passover. And somebody who's not familiar with the whole story might say, well, what's so hypocritical about it? Well, here's what's hypocritical about it. They have been bringing in false witnesses. They have been telling lies. They have been doing illegal things, and they are seeking to take an innocent man and put him to death. But what they're worried about is that they might be defiled by going into the house of a Gentile. You know, when Jesus did the Sermon on the Mount, when you go through the Sermon on the Mount, what's amazing is what Jesus teaches all the way through it is this. Some of you guys are really good at following the letter of the law, but you do not follow the spirit of the law at all. You know, we got a former police officer in here. The spirit of the law and the letter of the law is not always the same thing. And there are going to be times for a police officer when somebody might have broke the letter of the law, but he understood maybe they never intended to or whatever, and so they're going to be able to leave without getting a ticket or whatever. Well, here, the Pharisees, you know, one of the crazy things I learned about them is their gardens at home, when they grew herbs and spices, they would give 10% of those herbs and spices as a tithe. When they grew seeds, they would take those seeds and count the individual seeds out and make sure that they gave 10% as their tithe. At the same time, they had changed God's law to say that a man can divorce his wife for any reason he can come up with. This is what Jesus was telling them. You don't care about the spirit of the law. You follow these little rules and you declare yourself righteous. So quite simply here, they bound Jesus. They took him to Pilate, who is the governor. He's the military commander there in Jerusalem and the region around it. And so the Jewish trial is now over. They have their verdict. Their verdict is this man is guilty and deserves to be put to death. So join me down in verse number 29. Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you have against this man? So they answered and said to him, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. So they have brought him now to Pilate, and Pilate says, what is this man guilty of? Well, the charge they have against him is now going to get added to. Because the Jews here, and I want you to understand something, right now in this world, there's a lot of discussion about anti-Semitism. And when you get to this story, there's a lot of people who think when you tell this story that there's a lot of anti-Semitism. Here in the Bible, when it is speaking about the Jews, it is speaking about their leaders. You're going to find that the average Jew back in this day was the ones who were actually following Jesus. The average common Jewish person out on the streets who were poor and destitute, just like everybody else was, they actually were very fond of Jesus. Even some of them who had not believed in him yet were the ones who were following him around. They were amazed by him. It was the religious elites of Judaism who were seeking to put him to death. And you'll find times when Jesus even told some people, go show yourself to the priest. To me, that tells that Jesus is not condemning the priests in Judaism. The person he has a problem with here is the Sanhedrin. There's 70 members in the Sanhedrin, plus the high priest, which makes it 71. This is made up by the scribes and the Pharisees predominantly. These were rich men who, even though they were, quote, slaves of Rome, were managing to get wealthy the whole time because they took advantage of everything they could. And in my opinion, Jesus is a huge threat to them because he's literally going to put them out of a job. He's going to take away all their money because who's going to need the Pharisees anymore if the Messiah is here? So what does this man do? And literally their charge is blasphemy, but they already understand something. What does the Romans care about blasphemy? You know, it's interesting. In Rome, they had an insignia, and I don't remember which building it was on. But in Rome at that time, if you wanted to start a religion, you could go to the Roman government, you could tell them what you were going to do, and if they approved your new religion, because the Romans worshiped all kinds of gods. They were like the Greeks. I mean, they had the god of the sun and the god of the moon, and then a bunch of them that didn't have a god at all. So they let the Jews have their religion. But it's interesting because one religion that never made it on there was Christianity. And one of the reasons was very simple. Jews kept their religion to themselves. They didn't want any Gentiles. They didn't actually want any converts, to be honest with you. They wanted, it was about their race. If you weren't born Jewish, you couldn't be a Jew. Now you could, and God had always allowed people, but the Jews of that day, they just wanted to keep it amongst themselves. The reason the Romans never allowed Christianity is because true Christians spent all of their time trying to convert other people to their religion. It says a lot about the early Christians and probably doesn't say much about us, because nowadays I don't know how much time most of us spend actually trying to convert people to Christianity. And I've got a feeling that modern Christianity, the Romans might be okay with it because we're not doing that anymore compared to what the early church did. That's a lot to think about there. They tell him why they've brought him, and it's very clear. We want him put to death. They could not exercise the death penalty. Quite simply, if the Jews found someone guilty of something, they were not allowed to put them to death because they're not governing themselves. The Romans are governing them. Now, you're going to find, if you remember the story of Stephen, the Jews stoned him to death. So the simple truth was, if you got them mad enough, they would do it. They were so mad that day, they did it. And from what I've read from historians, the Romans let them do it quite often. But this is the biggest case they've ever had. And in my opinion, they would love for the Romans to do it, because then they'll just swear up and down, it wasn't us. The Romans killed him. Secondly, they were not allowed to. But what you see here is, look at verse 32. After they say it's not lawful for us to do it, it goes and says that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. John 12:32 is where you'll find that if you want to look it up and read it, but I'm going to tell you what Jesus said. He said, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. He made it very clear that he was going to be crucified. Now, he spoke about this a long time before this. But Jesus made it very clear that crucifixion was how he was going to die. That is very important because what we're going to see as we continue through this is God is in complete control of every single thing that is going on here. This feels like chaos. This feels like a bunch of crazy people who are trying to put an innocent man to death. And some people might want to go, well, where is God during all this? I'll tell you where he is, in complete charge of every bit of it. And I'm going to prove some of that to you in just a minute. Now, I believe when they bring Jesus here, Pilate's not completely shocked, because if you remember when Judas brought the people and came to arrest Jesus, he had Roman guards with him. Those Roman guards would not have been allowed to go unless Pilate had okayed for his own troops to go be involved in this. I don't think he knows much about it, but I don't think it's a complete shock. So I believe here the Jews thought, we're just going to tell him, okay, we've already had our own trial. We have found him guilty. Now all you need to do is just sign off on what we have done, and then you guys crucify him for us. And instead, Pilate decides, I want to talk to him. Look at verse number 33. It says, Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? This is the big question. Matter of fact, everything about this question is going to determine whether or not he gets crucified in the end. When you look at all four Gospels together, you're going to find that at this point, Jesus demands that witnesses be brought in against him because he had that right under the law. Just like you would in our country today, you know, if they're going to try you for murder, you're allowed to have witnesses on your behalf, and you're allowed to know who the witnesses are against you. And when you read the four Gospels, you'll find it not in John here, but in the other ones, that literally he tells them, are you not going to follow the law? And they go on about it. And Jesus tells Pilate here, though, I am the King of the Jews, but I am no threat to you. Now, I'm paraphrasing that. And here's what he says. If I were an earthly king, my followers would come and we would go to war. I am a king, but I'm not a king in this world. And I'm no threat to you, Pilate. And look down at verse number 38. Pilate says to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in all with him. Okay, here's what happens. And I'm trying to fly through this some. They bring all of this up, and basically Pilate comes to this conclusion. What do I care if he's a blasphemer against Israel's God? He said, I can't find anything else to try this man on. I could care less about your religious squabbles. I don't find any fault in him. And he's like, here, y'all can just have him back. When you read all four Gospels, now you're going to find something else. Now the Jews begin to add some more charges. They accuse Jesus of forbidding his followers to pay taxes. You go back and read the scriptures and you're going to find that Jesus was asked, should we pay taxes? And he said, yes, you have to. I've always said, there's things in the Bible that I wish weren't in there. That's one of them. I wish Jesus had said, no, if you're a follower of mine, you don't have to pay taxes. What he said was, Whatever government you live under, they have the right to tax you, and you have to pay taxes. I don't like it, but Jesus knows better than I do. They also, if you remember, accuse him of saying that he can tear the temple down and then build it in 3 days. He wasn't talking about the physical temple. He's talking about his body, and they knew what he was talking about. But they've made up all these lies. It is very clear these religious leaders have no problem with just flat out lying to get the results that they seek. And there is other things they say at one point that he kind of tried to start an uprising in Galilee. Jesus stands here, never says a word. Nothing. I want to remind you, this is trial number 4 that we're in right now. We've already talked about the first 3. This is trial 4. Now, I want you to take your Bibles and turn to the book of Luke, chapter 23. Luke, chapter 23. And I know this has been kind of difficult on y'all, keeping up and trying to follow me and everything, because we are covering a lot of ground and trying to do it in a short time. I'm not very good at being short or quick or nothing like that. So Luke chapter 23, I want you to come down to verse number 6. But we are following this in chronological order. And in verse number 6, it says, when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. Now, the name Herod is very familiar to us. This is Herod Antipas. He is actually the son of King Herod, who, if you will remember, some 30 years earlier had tried to kill Jesus while he was a baby. He had sent the order out to kill every newborn child under 2 years of age. This is his son. And here's basically what it comes down to here. Pilate sees an opportunity to get this out of his hands. Herod is a Jew. All right, that's very important. And because Herod is a Jew, he has power, but his power is given or taken away from him by Rome. And so Rome lets Herod deal with a lot of stuff that they don't want to deal with. When it comes to a lot of this religious arguments and stuff, the Romans could care less. So they let Herod kind of make himself feel important by letting him make judgments and rulings. He is what is called a tetrarch. And a tetrarch is a ruler who has to be subordinate to a higher power above him. He has power, but he only has however much power Rome lets him have. However, it's very important to remember this. He's a very dangerous man, because Herod Antipas is the exact same man who beheaded John the Baptist. So he has got enough power to kill Israel's most famous prophet at the time. And the reason he beheaded John is because John called out Herod Antipas for having an adulterous relationship with members of his family. And John the Baptist called him out as the sinner he was, and so he took John's head. Much like Pilate, he interviews Jesus, and he really doesn't see a real threat here. It's kind of funny. It says that he was excited, hoping Jesus would do a miracle for him. He asks a lot of questions. Now, Jesus never says a single word to Herod. Remember, he has spoken to the religious leaders while they're trying him. He has spoken to Pilate, not much, but from everything we can gather, he never replies a single time to Herod. Some people think that is because of the fact that he is not going to give Herod anything, because Herod literally killed John the Baptist. And I want you to remember, here's what Jesus said of John the Baptist. He said, of men born of woman, this is the greatest man ever. His point was, as far as a pure human being, there's never been one better than John the Baptist. He's not only that, he's Jesus' cousin, if you remember, through their mothers. And so, plus Herod goes by the title King of the Jews. That's Herod's title at that time, King of the Jews. And now, what is Jesus on trial for? For supposedly claiming to be the King of the Jews. So, even though Herod here can't find anything wrong with him, he decides to have a little fun with him, to mock him. So he places a robe on him, which is a sign of royalty, and makes fun of him and lets his guys have their laughs and everything. And then he sends him back to Pilate. Now, come on down to verse number 13, Luke 23. It says, then Pilate, so let's remember, that was the 5th trial. This is the 5th time he stood before somebody on trial. Now we're going into the 6th and final time when he's going to stand before somebody. And it says in verse 13, then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, you have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him. And indeed, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. So, he goes on now in verse 16 and says, I will therefore chastise him and release him. So, when he says he's going to chastise him, that is the word scourge. We're going to see here, there's 2 different types of scourging they did. This first one is known as the fustigatio. And believe me, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I even tried to look it up on pronounce, and it's a word that doesn't get used enough that nobody has ever give you a pronunciation on it. Listen, here's what it comes down to. It is very cruel. It is very awful, but it is not meant to tear a man to shreds. It is an extreme version of punishment. And I think here that when they do this, that Pilate's idea is, if we tear this guy up enough and we make him look bad enough, when we bring him back out here and the Jewish people see that he's beaten and bloodied, you'll find that at times they used the leather whip, and at times they also used clubs. And they would both whip people and beat them. So they bring him back out, and obviously he would have looked bad. And I think Pilate's idea was, when they see what I've done to him, they're going to say, okay, that's enough. Surely he's learned his lesson. That's good enough. Thank you. But their lust for his blood is not satisfied. So Pilate has another idea. When you take all four Gospels together, you find out about this Roman custom that it speaks of in verse 17, if you'll look back. For it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. This custom, it's not something that he absolutely had to do. I know that's kind of how it sounds, like he had no choice. He did have a choice, but it was something they did every year. And basically, remember, Rome is ruling over the Jewish people. The Jewish people hate the Romans. Listen, if the Russians took over the United States, we would hate the Russians, okay? Because they'd be here telling us what we could and could not do. They hate the Romans, and so every now and then the Romans would do something to kind of be like, look, we're going to be nice to you. Well, their nice thing was, right there around Passover, they would release a prisoner. And there's a man there who has one of the most famous names in all of history. We all know his name. His name's Barabbas. And him and Jesus are both there. They're both being tried. And so when you look at the four Gospels together, you will find that Barabbas is a very notorious person. He is a thief. He is a political rebel. And it appears that he was involved in a crime that led to someone's murder. And so it makes sense to me that as Pilate stands here, he marches the two of them out and says, I'm going to release which one of them. Which one do y'all want me to release? Well, obviously, Pilate is going to think, well, it's not going to be Barabbas. You know, he's already said, I can't really find anything Jesus has done wrong. Barabbas has been involved in murder. He's a thief. He's a horrible person. And so it makes sense the crowd would say, okay, yeah, turn Jesus loose and crucify Barabbas. I mean, the choice seems so simple. Do you want me to kill an innocent man or a thieving murderer? He says to them, don't you want me to set your king free? Now, I think he does that being a smart aleck, but at the same time, he's making a point. And then you will find over in Matthew chapter 27 that while he's sitting there, he gets an urgent message from his wife. The wife of Pilate sends a message to him, and here's what it says, Matthew 27:19. Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. So now Pilate has even more reason to let him go. Not trying to be funny, but if your wife sends you a message and says, do not kill this Jesus guy, kill the other one, that's what you're going to do. Happy wife, happy life is the old saying. And it wouldn't have been any different for Pilate than it is in any other part of the world. So now he has another reason to set him free. But if you'll come down to verse 20, Luke 23:20 says, Pilate therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them, but they shouted, saying, crucify him, crucify him. Then he said to them the third time, why? What evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one they had requested, who would be Barabbas, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus to their will. The crowd is given a choice between Jesus and a murderer, and they choose the murderer to be released. In that way, Barabbas is a picture of us. In the Bible, when one thing represents something else, it's often called a type. In other words, when you go to Leviticus and you look at all the different offerings the Jews did, those are a type, a foreshadowing of what we are looking at right here. Every one of those offerings is a symbol of a day when there will be one offering made and it will be the only offering ever needed. And it's exactly where we're at today. So those were a type of redemption. Here, Barabbas is a type of us. He is a guilty sinner who has no power to save himself, and yet his life is spared by an innocent substitute. Another one is going to die in his place. Obviously, it should have been Barabbas who's crucified. He deserved to be crucified, but it's not. Don't miss this here, though. While this crowd is given a choice, nowhere is the sovereign plan of God easier to see than right here. Do I understand how God's sovereignty works? I do not, many times. But what is important here is this. Everything up to this point that Jesus has said is going to happen has happened exactly as he said it would. Jesus was going to the cross no matter what this crowd decided. If the crowd said release Jesus, I don't know what was going to happen, but I know this much. Jesus was still going to be crucified. His death by specifically crucifixion was God's plan A. And make no mistake, there was and still is no plan B. It's easy sometimes to read these verses and think, wow, just think how history would have been changed if they had released Jesus. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. The Lord set this up, the Bible tells us, before the foundations of the world, and this crowd, while they are guilty for making the wrong choice, they made the only choice that was going to send Jesus there. Do I understand all of that? No, I do not. Because the sovereignty of God, as I think I've already told y'all this since I've been here, there are things you run into, and my simple thing is this. If it's unbelievable when you read it, just believe it anyway, because it's right. Whether you can grasp it or not, if you'll just say, God, I don't understand this, but I'm going to believe it, you will always make the right choice. You're going to find here Barabbas is released and Jesus is scourged again. I'm pulling all four Gospels together. But before he scourges him again, Pilate washes his hands. You remember that part, and says, I'm out of this. Y'all did this, not me. I am not guilty. And the people shout out, let his blood be on us and our children. But make no mistake, Pilate's bloody too. Because if you do nothing in the face of evil, you've done evil. It's that simple. If you see evil and you choose to do nothing about it, you're guilty too. Pilate, even though he washes his hands, Pilate was not innocent. The scourging he gets here is known as the verberatio, and it is violent and it is horrible. They are beaten mercilessly. It is a wooden stick that has leather straps on it, and they take whatever they can find, they cut little holes in the leather, and they stick rocks in it, they stick broken pieces of glass, they stick pieces of metal, anything in it that can do damage. We know it by name the cat of 9 tails. And when you were whipped with this, Jewish historians tell us that sometimes a majority of prisoners died from that and never got to be crucified, because it would literally rip the flesh from the person it was done to. It would tear muscles loose. It was as horrible as you can possibly picture it being. Sometimes, according to historians, it even ripped people to the point where you could see their internal organs. It's horrible. It was used to weaken and dehumanize a person. When we began this series, Jesus had placed himself willingly in a humiliated position of a slave while he washed his disciples' feet. And so we have to remember here again, he has willingly placed himself here. What's being done to him right now, I wouldn't even want to see that done to a murderer, to a thief, to a child predator. I would not want to physically witness that. I don't care who the person was. And here it is the Son of God who is all of these horrible things are being done to him. When you look at all 4 Gospels, here's what you're going to find. He is stripped again. They put a scarlet or purple looking robe on him. He is horribly beaten and bruised and bloodied. They form a crown of thorns and they bury it into his brow. You know, when we look at the old pictures of the crucifixion, we see a picture of Jesus with the crown of thorns on his head and that little trickle of blood. That is not what would have happened. From what I have read, they would have put those giant thorns on his head and they would have taken a mallet and beat them down until they pierced through his skin. You know, I understand why people painted those pictures, because none of us really want to see it. My life got changed many, many years ago when we went to see The Passion of the Christ, because I could barely get through that movie. I'd been preaching that stuff, teaching all this stuff for years, and I had watched no telling how many different Jesus movies, and they had always made the crucifixion look painful. In The Passion of the Christ, it was so bad that while they beat him with this whip, I can remember sitting there and I wanted to scream out loud, "Don't hit him again." I can't imagine seeing it for real, can you? The Son of God being mocked and beaten. They shout at him, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spit on him. They take a reed and beat him with it, and then they hand it to him. The idea there is, you know, a king would carry a scepter in his hand, and they're like, "Here, fake king, have a fake scepter." And they put his clothes back on him, and they send him off to be crucified. I was going to go to Matthew, but we're out of time, so I'm just going to run through this very quick to finish. Imagine being beaten with that whip across your back and across the front, and yet they grab a horizontal beam, and history tells us it might have weighed as much as 200 pounds, and they lay it on his back. Sometimes in movies, we see Jesus trying to drag the cross up a hill. They did not take the cross up the hill, only the piece across his back. And he begins going up there, and he has lost so much blood. He has been so horribly mauled that his body cannot take it. Listen, he's the Son of God. He is God, but he's also a man. And his body is no different than any other man's body. If you do enough damage to it, it will no longer work. And he cannot do it. And so they grab a man from the crowd, a man by the name of Simon, and they tell him, "You carry his cross," and they head off to a place called Golgotha, which stands for the place of the skull. Listen, there's never been a greater miscarriage of justice. Because there's never been another innocent person. I mean, I want you to remember that. There's only been one innocent person ever, and that's it. You know, I, I look back at some of my grandparents and stuff like that, and I know the stories of their life compared to like the life that I lived and other things, And, I remember my grandfather telling me one time, every date him and my grandmother ever have before they got married was on the front porch of her house with 6 little Bogard kids looking out the window and giggling and laughing. There was no way to do things you shouldn't do because you were never alone, ever. But they weren't innocent. They sinned, just like every other person. You go through all of history, and we can come up with all kinds of injustice that's been done to people, but this is the only innocent person ever. And we killed him. Despite all of this, all this mockery, all this injustice, and all this shame, God's plan is perfectly on track. Jesus will soon be what? You remember what he said? I will be lifted up. Guess where we're headed right now? He is going to be lifted up. Not only did he say it, the Old Testament says it. And Friday night, we're going to look at some of that as we move forward. But consider this. Right now at Golgotha, I've always loved this old saying from the Bible. It says, our redemption draweth nigh. In other words, our redemption is close. Understand, God's plan is headed up to Calvary, and that is exactly where our redemption is going to come from. For all the misery this story holds for us, the death of Jesus was our only hope. And as horrible as it is, in the end, it is the reason today why we can celebrate, why we can come together as brothers and sisters and praise the name of the Lord, because God loved us enough to give his only son to the greatest horror ever done, because Jesus was willing to die even for the people as they beat him with a whip. For all who would believe, he would willingly give his life. Would you join me as we close in prayer? I do want to say, promise Will we would say this. They're in desperate need of a bus driver tonight. If there is any I hope maybe they found one before we leave, but apparently they're in a bad situation and they need one. If you are able, please help them out. Don't forget, we'll be here 6 o'clock Friday night for our Good Friday service. Y'all be careful and have a great week. I'm going to close this in prayer. Father, I could say thank you tonight, but it would just feel weak when I consider everything that you went through. And, Lord, I realize that I played a major role in it, as did every other person in this room. It wasn't just the Jews who put you on Calvary. It wasn't just the Romans who put you on Calvary. It was each and every one of us, because we have all sinned against the holy God. And God has a wrath, a punishment on sin. And when a person sins against God, it creates a debt, and a debt that has to be paid. And there was nothing I would ever be able to do to pay my debt. And so you sent Jesus to pay it for me. Amazing. Father, I thank you so much for that. I look forward to our Sunday service, to our Friday night service. And Lord, as we wade through some of the horrors here that men did to you, I am thankful that you did it, because I realize it was my only hope. You loved me enough, and you loved everyone else in this room enough to go through this, that we might have the opportunity to believe and be saved. We love you. We thank you. We praise you in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Thank you, folks. God bless y'all. Thank y'all for being here tonight. Take care. Hope to see you back Friday night, if it's at all possible. Amen.